Welcome to the Nick Blevins Family Ministry Podcast. Our goal is to help you maximize your church's potential. You'll hear from top leaders in children's, student, and family ministry about the principles and practices they use. Now here's your host, Nick Blevins.
Hello and welcome to the podcast. It's episode 67, and I'm your host, Nick Blevins. And today I talk with my friend Kenny Conley about his transition to a new church. He's coming up on a year now in his role there as the NextGen Pastor at Mission Church in Gilbert, Arizona. And Kenny and I talk about what should the first year look like. So maybe you've been serving in your role at your church for 10 years, or maybe this is new for you. You're 6 months in or a year and a half in. Either way, this content's really helpful because when I listened to him share it, I thought, this is important all the time. But there are some unique things about that early part, the first year, the first 2 years. And he shares 5 great things to pay attention to in your first year there. So we're going to jump into that interview in just a moment. But before I do, you'll hear Kenny and I talk about the mastermind groups that are open now. We just opened that up a couple weeks ago. This coming year, I'm excited. We're going to have mastermind groups for ministry leaders in children's ministry, youth ministry, and for NextGen pastors. And Kevin Monahan's going to lead the one that's for multi-site. So we've got a bunch of different people that'll facilitate these groups. They're groups that'll meet via video call once a month. We'll, kind of put each other on the hot seat, so to speak, and we'll talk about what's a challenge in your ministry, how can we help, what's going well in your ministry so we can steal all your good ideas and you can share your resources and things like that. But at its core, Mastermind Group is really just a small group of people, 10 to 12 people, in a similar role, in a similar context, and we create community because of the similar things that we're facing. We share our resources, our ideas, we encourage one another, we challenge one another. I think that's another big part of a mastermind group is you have some accountability even outside of your church. It's another place where you can talk about things that are going on in your church that you probably shouldn't talk about with anybody in your church, those frustrations, or you want some outside wisdom. Groups are great for that. So those groups are open for registration now. I know many of you will wait till the deadline, September 15th, but you probably don't want to do that because they will fill up. And once they're full, we're not going to expand them because we want to have them at the right size. So Kenny's leading 2 of those, new to NextGen. So what he talks about in this episode will be talked about a lot in that group, but I'm sure it'll be very broad in the topic. So it'll talk about new to NextGen, but pretty much everything, all the challenges you're facing as a NextGen pastor, new in your role, which is most NextGen pastors, by the way. And then he'll also lead that group for NextGen pastors that are in churches that are larger, like 2,000 plus. So if that's you, jump in there. If you're in a different context, check out the page because there's a group for you. I'm almost sure of it. So you can see all of that in the show notes at nickblevins.com/episode 67. We have a link there to those mastermind groups. You can check those out. Be sure to sign up now before they run out. But let's go ahead now and listen to my conversation with Kenny about 5 things to pay attention to in your first year in a new role. Well, it's good to have the Kenny Conley back on the podcast. Welcome, Kenny.
Hello. It's certainly good to be here, and it's good to be back again.
That's right, episode 25. So if people haven't listened before, they got to go back and listen to episode 25. Some would say it was the best episode ever of the podcast.
I know all the people who said that it was the best episode
you
ever.
Do? How many of them? One?
It's my mother, my wife, myself.
That's awesome. And we talked about NextGen and staffing and all that. We'll talk a little bit about more of that in this episode. But give us an update because things have changed a lot since that episode till now.
I mean, not a lot. I'm still where I am. When in episode 25, I was probably about 2 or 3 months into a new job. It was my second church in the NextGen pastor role. And so it's just been, 10 months later. Really just, I'm coming up on 1 year, celebrating 1 year of being a NextGen pastor at Mission in Gilbert, Arizona. So it's been a fantastic year. It's been a lot of work and a lot of challenges. And just, I think for all those who are listening who are a year or, a year or 2 in, you know how tough that first year is. So it's been great. My kids are a little bit older. We moved out here with a 6-month-old. So it's certainly wonderful to have her a little bit older. And kids are back in school starting this next week. So things are great. Love being here. It's so excited to be in Arizona now.
And for anyone who hadn't listened to that one yet, and they're hopefully going to go back and listen, what just real quick snapshot of your previous church in your next gen role? Because this is your second go around. How many years there?
Yeah, no, that's great, and I love it because where we are in the world of next gen family ministry, I started at Gateway Church in Austin, Texas, back in 2008. So that was 9 years ago, almost 10 years ago. And when I stepped into that role almost a decade ago, there were only about 5 or 6 next-gen family ministry pastors that I even knew of around the country. It was still such a very new role. Felt very lonely and disconnected, and there weren't many resources to be able to help me figure out what to do, which we'll talk about here a little bit later in this time. But was there for 8 years, and then sensed a challenge to move on to something different. And I wasn't really looking for something at the point, but had a great opportunity through a connection of mine at North Point, and something new was happening at a church here in Gilbert. There's a church mission, community church, had gone through a pretty significant change with the transition with the senior pastor about 3 years ago through a moral failure. And so it's a church of about 7,000 that cratered to about 3,000 people. And a pastor had stepped in that had been a part of North Point. Joel Thomas, been part of North Point for many years, was looking to rehire some of his children's ministry staff, and he knew that I was available, and we transitioned the role into a next-gen family ministry pastor. So I've been doing that here. So almost about to celebrate 10 years of doing next-gen ministry in 2 different churches.
So 10 years ago, you knew of maybe 5 next-gen pastors, and maybe there were 20. I don't know. Like, how many do you think there are now? Because you already know there are a bunch more now just from people you're connected with. But, like, what would be your estimate now, 10 years later? How many are there?
So about 5 years ago, so this is other thing I kind of do, is I work with Orange, kind of helping them rally a tribe of next-gen family ministry pastors. Again, it's kind of a lonely position, a lonely role. If you have another one in your city, that maybe they're hard to find. And so one of my jobs is to help create a community for next-gen family ministry pastors with a Facebook group and through an email list and through some events that we do through Orange and other things. And so my list of next-gen family ministry pastors is just topped over 1,000 people. So, and when I started my list about even 5 years ago, I started with about 30 or 40 people. So it is, I believe, and I don't know that there's any way to measure this or anyone else could really tell you this, I believe it's one of the fastest growing roles in the church today, as more and more churches are seeing a need for this role or seeing the strategic value of this role. And so they're hiring next-gen pastors, family ministry pastors, or they're transitioning children's ministry or student ministry staff into this role. So, so I know a ton of people. And it's actually funny because I was on a video call yesterday, and somebody brought up, it was a next-gen video call with about 8 or 9 other amazing, Nick, you were on it too. And it was so funny because somebody who was talking about this guy named Chris Trethaway, who had been the family ministry pastor at Central Christian Church in Las Vegas. And all of a sudden my ears perked up because I hadn't heard that name in almost 10 years. And that was the first family ministry pastor I ever met, because I was in the middle of a transition right before I came to Gateway. And I was interviewing at that church for a children's ministry position. And it was in that interview with Chris Trethaway that I realized I don't want to be a children's pastor anymore. I want that guy's job. And so he was one of the first people I met. Now, we didn't really ever connect after that. And he transitioned a few years later out of that role. I think he's a senior pastor somewhere in the Northeast now. But that was, it was just so much has changed in the last 10 years. It is such an exciting role to be in. And it feels very pioneering that people are trying to figure it out and they're building best practices. So like before, there's tons of conferences and video resources and books. It's like a band of connected people that are sharing their experiences and talking about what's working, what's not working. So it's a really cool time to be in family ministry. That's what I believe.
Yeah, and just in case somebody isn't clear, the term, like when we say next-gen pastor, family pastor, it's somebody who oversees staff who lead birth through high school and even usually sometimes birth through college. But that's the idea behind it, that they oversee staff who oversee all of those areas. And we'll talk a little bit more about this, but they're kind of generalists because they know how to lead all those areas. But most of the job is leading staff. And because it's grown so quickly, like any environment we're in where you ask, like if it's NextGen pastors and you ask them how long they've been serving in their role, most of them it's less than 2 years. I mean, a lot of them it's less than a year. It'd probably be 30 or 40% would be less than 1 year. Very few are like 5 years plus. And so a lot of people I think listening to are new to the role. So I'm excited about the mastermind group that you're going to lead, both of them actually, the one for NextGen pastors in larger churches, but also this one for NextGen pastors who are new to the role, because I just feel like there are so many of them. And as we're going to talk about, I think there could be a lot of help provided to them in their first 2 years that would just accelerate. And so, and you've learned that because you did it, in 8 years before and took the long road, maybe. Yeah. So I want to ask and have you kind of unpack what you think your first year, maybe it's 2 years, whatever, should look like as a NextGen pastor, whether you're going to a new church or just moving into a different role in your own church. This is your first year there, but you've done this twice now. So what should your first year look like?
Yeah, let me back up just a second and tell you that this is why I'm so passionate about this and so excited about it. Was as this community was growing and I was getting to know NextGen pastors and family ministry pastors, one of the things that I said more often than anything else was, I wish I knew back then what I know now, because it would have changed everything. I would have gotten to where I am now so much faster. And so when the transition for me happened to come out here to Mission, I was so thankful because I stepped into this role now saying, I know what I know now. So my beginning here will be different than my beginning at Gateway almost 10 years ago. So I'm super excited because this first year has been wonderful. And I wouldn't trade what I experienced at Gateway. It was a long and hard road. And what I would tell a lot of people is that it probably took me a good 5 years to feel like I was making some significant traction in the way of family ministry. Like it didn't take that long to get our children's ministry in a healthier place and to get our student ministry in a more healthy place. But it took 5 years for it to really become an integrated and unified, and where it felt like we were winning on a regular basis. And it took 5 years. And I really believe that when I came out here to Mission, I said, I think I can do it in 2 years here, just because I know what I know now. And I definitely feel like we're on track for that here at Mission. And sometimes it's bigger reasons than just what I know. Here at Mission, the student ministry is in a far healthier place than it was at Gateway when I first stepped into Gateway. So there's a lot of different factors, but knowledge is key. And so actually today I want to kind of unpack 5 things that I found to be really significant in focusing. Okay, so what are you going to focus on in your first year? And so I want to kind of unpack what those things are. And
you would say, and I think you would agree that like the key here and the reason we're doing the mastermind group for NextGen pastors who are in their first couple of years is because they don't have to do what you did, which is take, the long year or the long road, 5 years. If because of having a network and learning from what you and others have done, they can speed up their process too. Because I think that's the key is we don't have to have your own experience to get there. You could learn from other people's experience and then speed up the process for you as well. Wouldn't you agree?
Absolutely. Absolutely. There are times where reinventing the wheel is necessary. It's like there are times when it's worth throwing the old away and let's start with a blank slate. But that's not true of everything. And there's so much work that needs to be done. And there's so many important things that we need to do. And if we can borrow from somebody else or someone else's experience, then that'll get us so much further ahead in the game, or be able to focus on the things that matter most and just copy and paste other programs or events or resources. So I think that's super helpful. And so my hope is that like I'm learning from, I've got a collection of 9 or 10 NextGen pastors that I'm on the phone with regularly with, and I'm learning from them, and I'm borrowing and stealing and copying the things that they're doing. But everyone who's listening to this should be doing the same. Who are the people that you're walking with? And that's why I'm excited about this mastermind, that we're going to do a mastermind for large churches, NextGen pastors at large churches. So we can talk about the things that are unique when you're leading a staff of more than 7 or 8 or 9 people. which is a different dynamic than a staff of one or two. So I'm excited about that mastermind group, but also I'm super excited about the mastermind group of this is your first year. And because I really do think that some of the things that you decide to do in your first year can determine whether it's going to take you 2 years to get to where you want to be or 5 years to get to where you want to be. And so I'm excited about the mastermind because I think it's going to help people adapt into their new role very quickly and begin to make the changes that need to happen much faster than if they were doing it all on their own. Definitely.
Now that you said that, there's some things you can do in the first year to make it faster. Now I'm like, okay, we all want to know those things now. So what do you think should be done in the first year? What should you focus on? And I think what'll be great is you can share kind of the principles that you're learning, but then also give us some of the like ground level experience at Mission as your first year. That'll be fun. So what's one of the things you've learned?
Okay. Yeah. I'm going to put this all in context too. I'll kind of unpack my story, both at probably some at Gateway and at Mission of how this unfolded. And these are just 5 things I randomly picked out. Like these are 5 things that just I think about a lot. And so if you were to talk to somebody else, another great leader who's done this, as well, you might get 5 completely different things. But I'd be willing to bet that several of these things will be the same because it's not just an idea, but they're principles here. So here's probably the first thing I would say, and I'll frame all these things in this. This is a marathon, not a sprint. And this is going to take time. And it's kind of thinking in a mindset of 3 to 5 to 7 to 10 years of thinking like it's going to take a long time to get things where you want them to go. And the faster you try to move things, the more damage you could end up doing. And so all this in the context of take your time. There are lots of things that you can do right now, but just take your time because this is going to be a long process. But so the first thing that I would say is take some time to learn the culture. And this applies probably exclusively to those that are moving from one church to another church and they're coming in to a new church. And whether you're coming in, regardless of what role you're coming into, whether it's a children's pastor, student pastor, or NextGen pastor, this would be the same principle. But you need to take the time to learn the culture of your new church. I found that it actually takes longer than you think it does. You might feel like you had a good interviewing process and you've been there for a week or two, like, okay, I got this. I understand this. And I've just found from my experience that it takes a lot longer to truly understand the culture than you think it does. I think sometimes we make assumptions about why this church does things the way that they do, and we get it wrong. I remember coming into Gateway, they had a very different approach to ministry that I thought was very beautiful. Like very few churches have a discipleship model the way that Gateway did. And it honestly took me, and for probably the first 6 to 8 months, I was baffled and confused as to, I'd go into meetings with my manager, say, you want me to do what? Like how, when do I do that? And it was just kind of wrapping my head around that. And every time I brought on staff, I just expected it was going to take a full 6 to 8 months for them to really get it of what Gateway was about. And I would even say that it wasn't until my last year at Gateway that something clicked for me as to why Gateway's culture was the way that was, and how heavily it was shaped by Campus Crusade, which our senior pastor and several of the people who started the church and some of the key leaders of the church had all previously been on staff at Campus Crusade, which had impacted this discipleship mindset for ministry. And so it took a long time. And actually me kind of that clicking with me around that took almost 8 years for me to figure out was what finally helped me understand where I actually fit or didn't fit in that organization. So even where I'm at Mission, it has taken quite a bit of time. And now my situation is a little bit unique in the sense that 3 years ago, Mission Community Church was a very different church. It was being led by a different senior pastor. The church was, 2 to 3 times the size it is now. The staff was 2 to 3 times it is now. And everything has changed. Even the culture, the vision has changed. The mission of what we're going after has changed. And so the learning curve is probably shorter in that case because everything's new. Everybody on staff is coming along to understand and learn a new culture. But I'm also, I feel like every day I'm learning things about who the staff was and how the past culture has affected them. I actually just had an assistant just resigned a couple weeks ago. And as I was unpacking with her why she resigned, a lot of what came up was the past culture and realizing there's some learnings that I had that I didn't find out until she resigned from the job, that saw some things I had missed, that I didn't know, that I didn't realize, things that she was struggling with that are probably the same things that other staff members I have that are struggling with, that have nothing to do with me or nothing to do with the current culture of the church, but it deals with baggage from the past. So I would just say, as a new NextGen pastor, new staff member to a new church, just take your time to really investigate and get to know the culture. You're going to find things that you didn't know were there that is having a pretty significant impact on the way staff is working, the way they're relating to each other, the way they're relating to you, or maybe even the expectations they have from you that you don't even know that they have. So take your time to learn the culture. That's probably the first one I have.
Yeah, and the practical thing is probably just doing a lot of listening, I would imagine, like working with your staff and asking a lot of questions and asking why is it that way, or how does that make you feel? You know what I mean? Like that's probably something you have to spend a lot more time on, as opposed to many of us would be driven to like, I don't have time for that. We got to take that hill. Let's change this. You know what I mean?
You're right. And it's so interesting because in the year that I've been here, I've met probably a minimum of 20 people who used to work in the children's ministry at Mission.
Wow.
And many of them are still attending the church. Many of them are now employed at other churches, and I'll meet people, and it's kind of just this running joke. Like, oh, hi, my name's Betsy. I used to work in the children's ministry at Mission. I was like, of course you did, because everyone did. And but like at one point in time, I sat down with my assistant and said, tell me who used to work here. What did they do, and why did they leave, or why did they get let go? And it's just, and I learned a lot from that. And actually, yesterday I was sitting in a coffee shop, and two ladies walked in, and both of them had worked, and one of them had actually been the children's pastor 5 years ago, and we just had the best talk. She's at another church now, and we just had the best talk, and I'm still not done learning of what it was of how our staff interacted with this previous staff, and but it's all connected, and so you're right. You have to be a little bit of an investigative journalist and asking the right questions and just observing, watching how other teams and starting to, dig into why do they do that? Or why does everyone seem to be working around that person? Why is that person still there? And asking those kinds of questions to really figure out what's going on behind the scenes, that people tend not to say how they really feel sometimes. They kind of bury their feelings or whatever. And so it's being willing to, especially when you're the new guy, you've kind of got that honeymoon, where you can kind of ask the awkward questions because they expect you don't know better to not ask that question. So yeah, it's asking lots and lots of questions, and not always just of staff too, of volunteers, high level volunteers. Like, hey, what's your experience been like as you've been a volunteer here? What's the culture been like on this team that you serve on? And you'll learn a lot from that.
That's good. That's good. What else is another, learning from your first year, or, to do in your first year?
Well, the next one's probably really connected to that one, and it's to get to know your staff. And this takes longer than you think. Really get to know your staff, get to know their perspective. They've got a completely different perspective than you do. It doesn't necessarily mean that what your staff has experienced or what your staff's ideas are the ones that you need to run with, or the things you need to do. But you really need to take the time to really get to know your staff. And because I've been surprised by my staff over the years at both at Gateway and here at Mission, where there's some people that maybe initially I was ready to write them off of like, man, they're just not getting their job done, or they're not going to do it. And come to find out that they're really in the wrong job. They're in the wrong seat. Great person, just in the wrong seat. And I wouldn't have known that unless if I hadn't taken the time to really get to know them and to see how they work and to understand that. And again, my situation here at Mission's been a little bit unique in the sense that there's been so much trauma and transition. My first 2 or 3 months here, I felt like I was just doing pastoral counseling for my staff, just sitting in an office with them and letting them cry and talk through their frustrations and the pain that they've gone through. And so I think, again, a huge piece of what you do as a NextGen Family Ministry pastor is lead a staff and lead a team, whether it's volunteers or staff, and you have to build trust. You have to earn their trust. And as you begin talking about vision, that when they don't understand it, they're willing to go because they trust you. And the only way you earn that trust and win that trust is by getting to know them, spending time with them, taking them to lunch, having them over for dinner. And so just don't neglect the time. There's many of us are type A, get it done kind of people. And so we come in, and especially if you've done this before and you've got your set of plans and your programs, and my caution would be like just to put the brakes on all that, pack that away. You're going to have time for that later. Just take the time to get to know your staff and learn who they are, get to know their families. Those things will earn you so much credibility and help you understand what's the future is going to look like with them or without them better than anything else.
Now you're almost, you're year end basically. Would you say you're to the point where you're not, because obviously what I hear is you're going to spend far more time early on meeting with people. So you're not going to spend as much time tackling those plans that you talked about. You're going to spend more time meeting with people. Like you said, your situation was unique, but it was kind of like pastoral counseling there. But even if it weren't that, there's still the time to get to know them and spend time with them and all that. 1 year later, are you spending a little bit less time now? And is it getting more to like, I don't know, what you would say would be like the normal rhythm of the future? Because you're always going to meet with people and get to know them and connect, but you're doing more of that early on. So in 1 year, has that changed? Or are you still in kind of that higher relational time?
Well, I think what's happening now is a year later, I'm doing things. I'm starting to implement the plan, but I'm doing it with staff as opposed to doing it by myself and telling staff, here's what we're doing. So like, here's an example of, when I left Gateway, I left a highly integrated team where the student pastor, the preschool director, elementary operations, like we all worked together as one cohesive team. And I got to Mission, and it was every single team was completely siloed. And there's certain things that I want our student, and typically this is true of most children's and student ministries. The children's ministry eagerly wants the student ministry to be part of the family ministry. And oftentimes the student pastor is kind of pushing away because it's just so disjointed and it's so different. Culturally, they're so different. And I really don't blame them. And to a certain degree, the student ministry, when I got here, was kind of the same way. It was siloed. But it was our children's ministry and student ministry were so different, and culturally were so different that there wasn't much in common. And the student ministry probably didn't want to really have that much to do with the children's ministry just because it didn't make any sense for them to, based on the culture and strategy and things like that. And so for me, this last year has just been one of my biggest priorities was just developing a relationship with my student pastor. And he's an amazing student pastor. And I believe that we're going to do some amazing things integrated of how we're working together with our kids and student ministry team. And part of it is I had to take time to transform our children's ministry culture to where it's more connected and more similar to what our student ministry culture is. And now we're actually sitting down and talking about certain things that we're going to do that are NextGen Family Ministry wide. In 2 weeks, we're doing a back to school bash for all of our small group leaders and all of our parents and all of our kids come to a huge event at the church. And we're casting vision for what it looks like to be in a small group and kind of challenging our parents and their small group leaders to connect together and work together for the sake of that. A year ago, if I would have suggested that they come to the back to school bash, which we did about 2 weeks after I got here, they would have laughed. They would have like, there's no way. And now we're doing it together, and they're equally invested in that. And I think the only reason I've been doing things to help lead our children's ministry team to be a team that a student ministry team would want to integrate with. But the other side of it too is just earning my student pastor's trust and helping him see the vision. Because I think he wants it. He wants to see what a family ministry. He's got 2 preschoolers of his own, and but it's been taking the time to build that relationship. And I'm going to do far more with him than me pushing things and begging him and asking him to participate. And we're at a point now, and there's some other key initiatives that we're working on right now about how we train small group leaders and how we equip them on a weekly basis. And we're getting ready next month to roll out a weekly content curriculum of how we're training our small group leaders. And it's preschool through high school. And he's a part of that. He's helping to write that. And he sees the value in that. But again, this wouldn't have happened if it hadn't been just a lot of lunches, a lot of meetings, a lot of hanging out, and slowly earning trust and building that relationship.
Yeah, that's good. Because just because you're the boss, so to speak, doesn't mean everybody's just going to do what you say and listen and follow. They could leave, if the relationship's not built, and then that just, makes the timeline longer, to get it where you want to go and all that stuff. So that's good.
No, you said something right there too, that I think is really important, that I could, because I'm the boss, I could say we're going to do this, and I could even use the phrase like, I've already done this. Like, trust me in this. Like, I've already done this. We're going to do it this way. And there's been many times where I've wanted to say, guys, we're doing this. Like, trust me. I've done this for the last 5 years, and I think there's something really valuable that I think we as a family ministry pastor, or whatever role you might be in, you have to have the confidence to know what you're doing. Like, you've done this before, like you're familiar with this, but you also have to understand that you went on a journey to get there, to build that confidence, that experience. And these people that you're leading, they haven't been on that journey with you. And so I think you have to create the space for them to come to where you are as well. And just case in point, just a couple weeks ago, I was in we were having this back to school bash planning meeting about 3 weeks ago. And I had probably more people in the meeting that needed to be there. And in the end, I knew where I wanted us to be. And but we basically spent an hour and we danced around the topic in every imaginable way, and entertained every absurd idea and challenged every idea and fought and and all those things. And it's funny because at the end of it, the student pastor, he said, "Hey, can we all give Kenny a hand?" Because he basically just sat through an hour of us telling him what we thought we should do when he's already done this 5 times very successfully. And it was kind of funny that he recognized that. And in the end, we're doing things different than I've done in the past because they brought a perspective that I didn't have, which is important for me to understand that if I let other people take the journey, then they'll bring a perspective that I didn't have, or we didn't have a gateway when we created this. But it also helps them feel invested of, I had a voice, I had an opportunity to speak an opinion into this or thought into it. And again, it takes time. And this only comes from you putting your expertise on the shelf for a little bit and just letting people have the freedom to give ideas and to give their thoughts and for those things to be processed.
Yeah, that reminds me, like our executive pastor, he'll joke that like he's a very straightforward kind of guy, you know what I mean? And so he's like he'll joke that like if you've already decided something, I don't really want you to like give me 30 minutes to like get there on my own. Just tell me, but tell me why. Like I want to know why, so I can buy in. You know what I mean? But don't waste time. Making it seem like my opinion will matter. That's his thing. Correct. Like correct. But the key is what you said is that you actually listened, and it did end up changing your perspective. So you didn't just. I think it is important to give them time to in any setting for people to talk about it, think about it, get to where you already are and buy in. But we should also go in with that mentality, like you said, of, hey, maybe we'd change my mind. Maybe we'd actually do something totally different. You know what I mean? So be open that you're not just like fake walking them through the process or whatever, or making it seem like they have input, but you really do give them input and you really will use it if it's a better idea.
I tell my staff all the time, I said, I'm very opinionated. Like I have strong ideas. But on the same side, I said, I want someone to change my mind. Like, give me a better idea. And so I love to fight. I love to argue. I love to wrestle with ideas. And I think more people need that kind of mentality of like, your idea is not always going to be the best idea. And so challenge people to change your mind and give them the freedom to be able to do that. So, but I think that's helpful.
That's good. So what the next one you talked about is, getting to know your staff. You talked about getting to know the culture, but then there's also you and your role. So tell us about that.
Yeah. So this next one is learn the role. if this is your first time as a family ministry pastor or NextGen pastor, this role isn't what you think it is. You think you know what you're getting into, but it's not what you think it is. And I have a resource that I'm working on right now. It's part of a breakout I did at Orange 2 years ago. And it's called the secret job description of the NextGen pastor. And I call it the secret job description of the NextGen pastor because there are certain things that you will spend a lot of time doing that will never be on a job description. And I it's funny to watch. I watch other people step into the role. And actually, my previous youth pastor who stepped into my role, and he would call me and he would be like, "Oh my gosh, I had no idea you had to do all this. When am I going to do my work?" And so there's certain aspects. And so I think you need to take a minimum of 3 or 4 months just to find your pace, because there's a lot on your plate as a NextGen family ministry pastor. I tell people all the time is, probably the biggest part of my job is meetings and preparation for meetings. I spend a stupid amount of time in meetings, and I'm not, and I know people will argue, and productivity people argue like, well, if you're spending too much time in meetings, you're not being very productive. But you sit at a level in the organization that your input is significant and needed, and you have responsibility. So I'm carrying the weight of responsibilities that my senior leadership needs help with. And so I spend a significant amount of time bringing the voice of family ministry to the table, to when we're deciding things about campaigns, or we're deciding things about staffing models and values for our organization, and different things like that. So I spend a pretty significant amount of time in meetings with my peers and with my leadership, and working on projects for them and helping them assess certain things. Some of these things don't impact my staff or the volunteers in the ministry that I lead at all. And but then on the other side is that I have to spend a lot of time preparing for and leading meetings for my staff, my one-on-ones, different volunteers. And so it's just a pretty significant level and pace of, like, even when it comes around to like calendaring time and budgeting time and staff reviews, I guess a significant amount of time that feels very disconnected from what I used to do as a children's pastor, or what I used to do as what would have done as a student pastor. So some of it is just like learning the new pace. And I think one of the most beautiful things that happens is that you find yourself immediately in this role. The pressure that you felt, and this isn't speaking to those that are in the bivocational role of the NextGen pastor still leading student ministry. If you find yourself fully and truly in the family ministry role, your Sunday mornings are going to get a lot easier, in the sense that your volunteers aren't calling you that they're not going to be there, or you're not scrambling last minute to put the curriculum together, more than likely. But the weight that gets put on your shoulders throughout the week is a completely different weight that you've ever had to bear. So part of this in your new role of, again, don't jump into something or create commitments or start to make changes because you don't know what your pace is going to be like yet, or the weight that you're going to bear. So take a little bit of time just to get familiar with the role and adapt to the meetings that you're in, adapt to the conversations that you need to have on a regular basis and the responsibilities that you have, because it's heavier than you think, and there's a lot more to the job than you think. And so take your time before you start making some big changes or making some big investments, because there's a lot to your role that you didn't know until 3, 6, 9 months after you get into the role.
Yeah, I find, and you know this as well, that a lot of NextGen pastors end up on like the leadership team of the church, like you're talking about. And so that's why they end up with other responsibilities and things like that. And I don't know about, I think you're the same as me, and I think most NextGen pastors are this way, where that's what you want too. Like, you like
yes.
that. You don't want the one job by itself. You want to have influence elsewhere and help the church in other ways. And I always say, like, NextGen pastors, you kind of have to like meetings. Like, nobody likes bad meetings, but you kind of have to like meetings. And you probably should like having a lot of things going on at one time,
Correct.
Because if you're like, I just love large group productions, that's a different job. Like, it's totally,
That's right.
And there are people that do that. That's their thing. They love one thing, they like to be specialists. And so they want a role that's more consistent day to day and week to week. NextGen pastor roles are crazy. I just this week emailed the person that kind of does the operations and stuff for our team, and she helps me with things I do outside of NextGen too. And it was basically like 8 or 9 projects that I'm like, wow, this is a lot that we have to do by the end of the year. And I guarantee half of them were not NextGen. But I love it. Like, it's fun. I love that. And I know different roles have different responsibilities. A lot of people step into the role and that won't happen to them until a year or two in. But like you're saying, you should probably be careful on the front end because you might get hit with stuff right out of the gate. It's like, oh, yeah, we forgot to tell you that we also need you to lead whatever. I don't know, these young adult small groups or social media, something over here, or do this project that we're all working on together or whatever. So that's good to know. That's a good thought.
And you'll find yourself, too, of I'll be sitting in a leadership team meeting where a conversation will come up of like, hey, we're wanting to revamp this. One of them was happened to do with how we communicate and the culture that we have around volunteers at our church. And all of a sudden, like, my ears perked up. I was like, I lead the largest group of volunteers in our church. And I was like, give that to me. I want ownership of that, because I don't want somebody else who doesn't lead as many volunteers as me, changing that. So like, you'll find yourself of taking on larger responsibility because of how it impacts the area that you lead. And so you'll find yourself picking up things all the time just because it impacts. And there's a certain expertise that you probably have that you can lead into that, but it's all good. You'll take that. But then the other thing I would say, you may not sit at the leadership team, which is completely possible, but there's this idea, and there's another conversation that I have on a regular basis called generational collaboration. And it's this idea of how are we collaborating with other ministries to remove silos and to begin to integrate our ministries as more of a cohesive unit. And so even if you're not sitting at the leadership team, you need to spend a significant amount of time with other ministries, whether it's the adult ministry in your church, maybe it's the arts ministry in your church, or whatever else other ministry it is, to build bridges, because there's going to be certain things that your ministry can help them with, and there's certain things that their ministry can help you with. And nobody's necessarily going to sit down and say like, hey, you and so-and-so need to sit together and figure out how to work together. Nobody's probably going to have that conversation with you, but it's going to do your church good and it's going to do your ministry good if you can figure that out. And that's extra things that you're taking on, nobody's asking you to, that in the end will help your church to win and help your ministry to win. So it's just, and you're sitting in the position to do that, to be able to be the person, be the voice, to be able to do those kinds of things.
Yep. Now, the first 3 are, a lot about learning, culture, staff, yourself and your role and all that. And then this next one is really, you've been in this, neck deep into this. You're talking about diving into a role when necessary, which I think everybody who's served in this role is going to understand that. They're like, oh yeah, I'm doing that. I've done that. So tell us about that and what it's looked like at Mission so far. Yeah,
this next one's dive into a role when necessary. And this is what I think, whenever a senior pastor, an executive pastor asks me about why NextGen, why family ministry pastor, like, why is this role so important? And I'll say this might be one of the main reasons here, is that NextGen family ministry pastors are generalists, that there's not a job under them that they haven't already done or couldn't do to some degree of expertise. And so the beauty of that is that when you have a family ministry pastor or director in your church, and a children's pastor or a preschool director or a junior high pastor resigns or moves out, or you move them out, then it's not a disaster, because, hey, that's something you can do, and you can step into that role for a season. It might be for a couple weeks, a couple months. It might be for upwards of a year. But that's the beauty of the NextGen role, is that you are a utility player that can dive in, and it may mean that you're leading in 2 areas for a season. And that's a great thing. It's a great way for you to really understand that ministry and understand the culture around those volunteers and things. And so I can't tell you, in the 10 years of being a NextGen pastor, I'd easily say that more than half of it has been sitting in more than one role at a time, of being both a NextGen pastor and, interim youth pastor or interim preschool director. And I think it comes with a job. Depending on how big your church is, probably the smaller your church is, the more often you'll probably be finding yourself stepping into those roles to fill in the gaps. So here at Mission, I'll tell you why this is so important too in just a second. But here at Mission for the last, I got here in July, kind of really got ramped up in August and September last year. And in November, my elementary director resigned. Actually, there's the elementary director over K through third. And it was, I think it was a healthy thing. It was healthy for her. It was healthy for the ministry. And I knew I wasn't ready to hire somebody yet to step in that position because there was too much work that needed to be done to stabilize that ministry, to transition the philosophy of that ministry. And there are some other staff members in the older elementary that I wanted to shift around. And so the best thing to do would be for me to step into that ministry for a season. And actually that season's I'm still in that season. So that's I stepped into the role in November, and here we are coming into August, and I'm actually about to hand it off to a new staff person here in the next probably couple weeks. And it's been so good. And it's been, and it's not been completely overwhelming in the sense that one of the differences was in the beginning, we had about 60 or 70 small group leaders in this area of elementary. And this one elementary director was overwhelmed having to oversee all the large group. And every single one of those small group leaders were emailing her whenever they weren't going to be there or scheduling stuff. Many of them were every other week. It was just a disaster. Now, 9 months later, we have coaches at every service and every grade. And so now I don't send any emails to any of these, and I'm not getting emails from any of these volunteers. I send out an email on Monday, and actually I've got somebody else who sends that email out to the coaches who then connect with all the volunteers, and the volunteers. Most of these volunteers have already started finding their own subs. They've been recruiting their own subs. So a lot had to happen to transition this ministry that we probably within the first 2 or 3 weeks, about 30 of them all resigned, which that kind of happens, when there's a change in leadership or whatever. Yeah. And we had to build it back up, create a more organized volunteer structure, and then begin to rebuild some things. And so one of the things was every single week I wanted our volunteers to see something get better. And so I had an intern, a volunteer who's probably giving me about 15, 20 hours a week, who wanted to invest. So I empowered him to help rebuild our large group. And he's done a phenomenal job of that, where we had about 2 or 3 people who serve at every service every week, to building a team of 10 to 15 volunteers who serve all 3 services once a month. And we have an amazing large group experience now. And now we have incredible coaches leading a almost fully staffed small group, where no group is bigger than 8 or 9 kids. And so now I'm ready to hand it off to the next person. The value of doing this for you diving in is it's always going to keep you sharp. It's going to help you to get to know. It's really easy as a NextGen family ministry pastor to be disconnected from your volunteers, because you're just popping in and out from place to place and people don't really know you. But for a season, for a couple months, you're going to really get to know a group and team of volunteers and be able to learn from them and to invest in them and to build them up and raise up some leaders. But what it also helps is for the rest of your staff to kind of look in and see what you're doing. And what you'll see is oh, that's what a coach does, or, oh, that's why volunteers need to serve every week. And, oh, it is possible to ask volunteers to serve every week. And so sometimes stepping into an area, it allows you an opportunity to, and actually I've also found too in this last year, is allowed us to prototype some things that we would then launch across all of our ministries, that would have been harder for me to do without the buy-in of one department. So it's been a great season, and I'm actually getting ready to hand off elementary, and then probably here in the next month or so, I'm going to do a deep dive into our preschool and nursery ministry, doing a lot of the same stuff, helping them establish coaches. I've actually got a couple coaches in my pocket already that I've been talking to, and launching coaches and beginning to transition from every other week volunteers to every week volunteers. So this is why this is a 2 or 3 year plan, because sometimes you got to step in to 2 or 3 different ministries to help get them in a place where they need to be.
Now, you I know everybody listening is like, I want to hear more about this, because like no matter what ministry you lead in, people want more volunteers. They want weekly. They want coaches. They want a healthy ministry. And you basically, were able to transition this in 9 months. Now, the cool thing is, you've documented most of this. You're going to hopefully put this together in some kind of a thing, a resource that people could use to like, okay, let me see the emails you sent and the timeline and the meeting, which is great because I think everybody would love that. The downside is now that we've, talked about it publicly, they're going to email you. So you have to get that done. But
no, you're right. No, I think and what I may need to do is I'm going to give you a link to the show notes that if people want access to this resource that they can sign up for it in this link. And so this is something, when I started doing this, I was so excited to be able to do this. This is so funny. Doing everything for the second time is so much more fun because like, okay, now I know what to do. But I also want to help other people. My heart's always been to help other people as well. But I'm documenting everything. So every single email that I sent to my volunteers, the agenda for the meetings that I had with coaches to explain this is what a coach does. This is how these are your responsibilities, and all the different transitions that we've made. They're all documented, and I'm going to just basically dump them all in a folder to share, and along with walking through a timeline of. And I can actually share like here this week 10 people resigned. So
you get the real side of it. Yeah.
And I recruited one person. There was a season back in March where I turned to my we were doing a recruitment at the end of March, and I turned to my intern. I said, this recruitment can't come soon enough. I mean, we were finding subs, like we were finding people who had resigned like 6 months ago. Like, hey, we need a sub. I know you don't serve anymore, but I need somebody at this service. Like we were scrambling, and now we're at a completely different point where many of our volunteers have already recruited their own subs, and we've trained them, and it's like a completely different environment. That the first 2 or 3 months, like. I was probably spending 80% of my time doing elementary, where now I spend about 10% of my time doing elementary, still without a staff person in that role. And so, I want to share that information. So we'll put that in the show notes where they can sign up for like, I don't know, I'll call something like, the 9-month turnaround. But we really did a lot in 9 months, and I'm really proud of what we did. And I really do feel like anybody can do it. If you've got, if you can cast vision and lead people well, anyone can do it.
I do want to ask one detailed question about it. Just generally speaking, one of the big transitions obviously was every other week volunteers to weekly. Did you do that early on? Was that like an early on vision cast and people quit, or did you wait a little while? Like I always wonder about that.
We started right away. Part of it was a lot of the people who quit were people who were, I think they were. Again, part of it was the cultural context of mission, of like awful things that happened here, and it was a really tough season. And I think a lot of people were connected to our previous elementary director, and like they were all going through this challenge together. And I think they found solace in serving together. And as soon as she resigned, those people were like, we're done. They didn't just quit. They left the church. It was like,
wow.
It was the last straw for them. So a lot of the people who resigned, like they left, like they're gone, which is a little unusual. And I think a lot of people won't find that. But what we did was, as we began recruiting, and I recruit every day, all the time, anytime I'm talking to anybody, I'm recruiting. I was only recruiting for weekly small group leaders. So like it wasn't an option to serve as an every other week volunteer. Yeah. And then we started having lots of meetings from our pre-service coaches, huddle meetings, to just impromptu meetings that we would do for trainings. And every time we talked about the value of being there every week, of the lead small principle of be present. And we would talk about it. And then I started scheduling one-on-ones with all our volunteers, specifically those who were serving every other week. And I would just bring up the conversation. And oftentimes they would bring it up. They were like, hey, I want to talk to you about serving every week. And I was like, really? And so a lot of people, they moved to every week because they just kept hearing the vision and caught the vision for it. And then a handful of other people just said, you know what, move me to a sub role. I just don't have the capacity to do every week, but I still want to be involved. So we started from day one, but I didn't put an ultimatum out there until we did promotions in May, and it was in May that we made the final transition of, if you're an every other week volunteer, we're transitioning you to a sub, and you're not a set small group leader for that group anymore. So for me, it was, I had 6 months before I had to sit down with somebody and say, okay, we're at a crossroads.
Yeah, but that's good to know. You started it early, like almost right away, and then just took 6 months though till you finalized it. I know a lot of people are terrified of that transition, and I get that. I know a guy just north of me who lost. Now his was different because he was changing the whole culture. It was like a Sunday school model, but he lost almost all his volunteers. So that I probably, there's a good reason some people were scared. But most stories I hear are like similar to yours, where even just if you look at the numbers, if you have 100 every other week volunteers, you only need half of them, 50, to go weekly to get you exactly where you were before. So a lot of times, if you can get 60, it's like you've increased your volunteer role. You know what I mean? Like it's like you've added to the team. And so it's usually not, I'll say that, as scary as people think. It's just, it takes the time, like you're saying, all the meetings, the vision casting, and then having the courage. And it's like you said, you tell people now it's a weekly role. It is so much easier to say that to someone new. Mm-hmm. That part's easy. It's converting people who are already serving this hard. Telling someone new. We had a lady one time, her sons had been in our elementary ministry, so she knew small group leaders were every week. She really wanted every other week. And, our elementary director drew the line there. She walked out, and not mad, but she's like, yeah, okay, I don't think I'm going to be able to do it. And then she came back in and was like, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it. It's been so good for my boys. I want to do it, for somebody else. And it's like, that's the power of being able to draw that line and saying, no, it's every week, And
I'd say it's 90% mental, because even when I did my Gateway, when we finally drew the line and said from now on, we're only recruiting for weekly volunteers, we found that we recruited the same number of people than we did when it was an every other week. And I was like, this is ridiculous. Like, why did I, why was I, begging for scraps before when I could have, but it has everything to do with the vision, because if you don't lead well with the vision, then it's going to feel like you're just asking for more. Yeah. But when you really cast a vision for weekly ministry, people, they'll shake their head and like, I get it. Like, I know, like this has to be, like, it's a hard job, but I'm going to do it. And the higher you raise the bar, the better the people you get too. And that's a completely different conversation that we could talk about on another time, but about sometimes you also have to move out your lower performers, your C players, because you're the top people that are going to transform your ministry. They don't want to serve with a bunch of C players. And I know that sounds really bad, but
it's totally true.
But you raise the bar, you get better people, and then better people attract more better people. I know that's grammatically incorrect, I'm sure, but there's something really to that. And you can find amazing things for C players of where it's not going to crush you when they don't show up, or they decide to teach their own small group lesson compared to there's things that you can give them that they'll do marvelous at, that the success of your ministry isn't depending on them. So
and they could be they need to be in a different role, or sometimes if you only have a small percentage of C players, all of the other people that are really good will help train them up. Like they'll get there. I think the problem is like that's most of your team. Well, nobody's helping them. That is the culture. You know what I mean? That probably means you have people who are even worse than that, that are needing some help too. So that's true. So what's the last, I'm sure there's a million, but what's the fifth thing that you think, you should think about or learn or do in your first year as a NextGen pastor?
I think the last thing for me, what I would say is to chart your future. Is even all these things, like a lot of what I would tell you in all these things is like to pause, to wait, to slow down, to, wait and listen, all those things. But I'm not advocating a passive approach to leadership. One of the things is to chart your future, like know where you're going. So like I have a job description, or not a job description, an organizational chart of where I want my staff, what I want my staff to look like 2 or 3 years from now. And I've got the positions, and it's very fluid. Like I'm going to find just the right person who won't be a fit in this way. So I may have changed the org chart a little bit, but I know what I'm looking for and what I'm trying to hire. Because here's what happens. Like people move, or people get tired, or people resign. And if I know where I'm headed, then when somebody steps out, I can celebrate them. I'm like, I'm so sorry to see you leave, and I wish you the best and wish you well. But now I've got an opportunity to hire somebody and put them in the position that I know I'm going to need us to be organizationally a few years from now. So this is great, and I've got people on my team that I don't know that they're going to be there long term, or 2 years from now that they're going to be there. But I'm not in a rush to I don't need to fire somebody. I don't need to move somebody out. We've got time. We're gonna continue to move the organization, and they may self-elect this isn't right for me. And when they decide to do that, then it frees up an opportunity for me to put the right person in the right position. And so, but you won't know that if you don't already know where you're going. So be real clear. And my management, my leaders know this org chart. They know where I'm headed. They know where what this is going to cost 2 years from now, we don't have the money for that right now, but hopefully 2 years from now we will. And so I think it's being intentional of knowing where you're headed. And this might help if you're brand new into the job. This is one of the most popular questions I get from new and existing NextGen pastors is, what's your staffing model? How do you staff? What people do you have in what positions? And so this would be really helpful or it might be helpful to have a mentor or to be in this mastermind group, just even to help you clarify what your staffing goals are and what roles that you're looking for. So that way, when there is a transition or in that season of where you're spending a lot of time getting to know your staff, and then you're able to start cast vision for a new type of role that you think they would be perfect for. And then the first conversation you have with them, they're like, oh, I could never do that. That job sounds awful. But over the period of 3, 4, 5 months, all of a sudden their heart becomes to grow into that. This role was built for me. And so I think it's knowing what you want and knowing where you're going, and then just taking your time to start putting your people in those places when they're ready and when you're ready.
And I think the key that you're saying there is having that plan, but being patient with it. And then you've talked about this before, in that breakout, actually, you mentioned about the secret job of a NextGen pastor. Every time our friend Kevin Monahan will say that, every time somebody steps off the team, it's a chance to reevaluate if you want to rehire for that or not. And I think one thing for sure, I think one of the challenges with staffing is that, resources are different, church sizes are different, the structures are different. So there is no one size fits all NextGen staffing strategy. But what you're saying is right. If you can get around a coach or with some other NextGen leaders, you can learn from what they're doing and kind of get the principles of it. And then apply that to your context. So it's not like they're going to tell you, hire this, then that, then this, you know what I mean? But you can learn, okay, that role would be helpful. And you know what? I'd rather have, a director over that age group rather than maybe a children's pastor overall or something like that. So there are some principles there that I think are helpful. And that's needed because there isn't a cookie cutter. Hey, just do this,
Right.
Versus I think sometimes that does exist in other roles within the church. I think the new NextGen model makes that a little more complicated. It's just not one size fits all. So, and my favorite is when I see the teams that have and you do this, you build your team around their strengths. And the area is not so much about age groups, or things like that. I think that's really helpful. So that's good.
And so I'm gonna camp out on what you just said too. That I think is really important is that there are other people that have been doing this longer than you have. There's people that have been doing it longer than I have that we need to tap into and we need to understand. And so I'm gonna promote this mastermind group or whatever else it might be. The things that have gotten me to where I am today have been the coaches and mentors that I've had in my life and the peers and the relationships I've surrounded myself. I am miles beyond where I should be because of the relationship that I've had. And I'm a networker. I'm always on the phone with somebody. I'm always having lunch with somebody, learning from people, but I know not everybody's wired that way. And so here's what I would say. It took me 5 years to get significant traction in our family ministry at Gateway. I believe we're going to get there in 2 to 2.5 years here at Mission. But the reason for that is because of the experience that I have now. I didn't know last time around what I know now, and I'm going to get there faster. If you find yourself in you're in your first year or two as a NextGen pastor, you need a coach. You need a mentor, somebody who's already done this, somebody who's further along, somebody who thinks differently than you do. And I get it. Coaches and mentors and all those things, like, they can be expensive. You don't have budget for it. But I will tell you this, it's a lot cheaper than taking 2 or 3 extra years to get to where you really want to go. And I've always prioritized in my budget mentoring and coaching and those kinds of experiences for myself and for my staff, because I need them to develop in that way as well. And so I really encourage you. I'm looking forward to the 2 mastermind groups that I'm going to be leading. There's some other incredible coaching and mentoring opportunities around. Jim Weidman leads the Infuse group primarily for children's ministry leaders, but it's phenomenal. I spent 2 years in that mastermind group, even as in that coaching network, even as a as a NextGen pastor. Orange has You Lead Coaching, which is an amazing. It's brand new, and they're doing amazing things in that. Like, you need to connect and get a mentor, get into a coaching group, get into a mastermind group. But I'd love to be able to connect with some people in this mastermind group we're getting ready to launch.
Yeah, I'm like you. I feel like we need so many more of them that it's just great that there are others out there, but I feel like there's nowhere near enough. You know what I mean? Like, we could multiply how many there are times 10, and there's just so many leaders who should be in one. And I've been in 2 before that were expensive. They were 5 times what we're going to charge for these. So I'm excited that people like you and Kevin are willing to do these and make it much more affordable for people. Plus, we're going to give away a bunch of great stuff. But even the ones that I was in that I had to spend more money for, and a lot of that was out of my own pocket because it wasn't something that our church would budget that much for. Totally worth it. Totally worth it. I would do it again. Like, in fact, there's a joke because there are guys like when I was in the second one, there was a guy who'd been in the same kind of coaching network with the same person 3 times. Like, it was his 3rd time. So, like, he knew all the content, you know what I mean? At that point, he just loved the community, which was key.
I would say for me, and this is what some people don't get also, they go into these mastermind groups or these coaching networks and they come away maybe feeling like, well, I don't feel like I learned what I wanted to learn. And there hasn't been one that I haven't learned a ton from. And I think maybe it's how you position yourself of what can I learn from this person. But like, I spent 2 years in Jim Weidman's Infuse coaching network, and it had very little to do with the content and almost everything to do with getting access to Jim Weidman. And now he's one of my closest ministry friends. And anytime I need anything, he's a phone call away. And you can't put a price on a relationship like that. And so sometimes these mastermind groups and these coaching groups, it's everything as much about the relationship as it is about the knowledge and the information. And so I can't stress that enough. And so and what that's played in my life and in my family. So that's a big deal. So yeah, it's definitely worth it.
And the 2 I did weren't even NextGen related. So that's what's really funny is they were all executive pastors and pastors. But that was okay because it was still great. And I think I would agree with what you just said. The biggest benefit for me was the relationships coming out of it. I did mine with Tony Morgan, who I just had on the podcast that airs right before this one. And now, it's been great because he's been from afar. I learned from Tony from his writing and his blog, for years. And then being in a couple of those coaching networks, like that was just invaluable, And so, and that relationship has continued. We brought Tony in to consult with our church 5 years ago and all of that. And that's been helpful. And in fact, we're bringing him in again this fall. And I don't know if any of that would have happened, if I hadn't pushed out there to get in a coaching network and develop those relationships. So yeah, I hope everybody will do it. And even just networking in Facebook groups or in your area, if there's a network in your city, of similar pastors and whatever role you serve in, I just think that's huge. So
actually just a couple of months ago, I lead a couple NextGen Facebook groups. Some of them are invite only because of, the Next experience that we do every January. People participate in that and alumni of that. But this last spring, I started a Facebook group called I Am NextGen. And it's connected kind of because I also have a NextGen blog now also, which is new, launched around the same time, called IamNextGen.com. But that's an open, it's not, it is a closed Facebook group, but you can request access to it. And as long as you're a NextGen pastor, because I am keeping it focused, it's not for children's pastors, it's not for student pastors, it's only for those that are in NextGen ministry. But if you are a NextGen pastor, family ministry pastor, you oversee birth through high school or more, you want to be connected with other people, there's lots of great conversations happening in that group. You can, I'm sure we'll put a link in the show notes to that as well. You can request access to that group and begin. And there's no cost to that. You can just join that fellowship of family ministry pastors.
Yeah, which is great. Documents are shared, ideas, things like that. It's awesome. So everybody can do that, and that's all free, no matter what role you're in. So I think that's great. Is there any other way people, we want to mention that people can connect with you, online if they have a question or anything like that?
Yes. My phone number, just kidding. I won't do that.
Give out Jim Weidman's. Give out Jim Weidman's. My number
I won't give you Jim Weidman's number either. But I will give you, I'm fairly active on social media. I'm Kenny Conley on Instagram, Kenny Conley on Facebook, Kenny Conley on Twitter. So you can find me there. You can reach out to me on any of the social medias and ways, and we can connect that way. I blog at childrensministryonline.com. I blog at iamnextgen.com. And so you can connect with me through any of those. There's contact forms there. So I'm pretty easy to get a hold of. Sometimes you got to be a little persistent because I do have a lot of irons in the fire. And so I do not mind if you email me or reach out a second time like, hey, buddy, I emailed you a month ago and you haven't gotten back to me. Those who are persistent, the squeaky wheel always gets the grease. So just reach out. I'd love to connect with you and help you. And especially this resource we're talking about with this turnaround. The links will be in the show notes. I'd love to share more resources like that with you if you're interested.
Awesome. Well, Kenny, thanks for taking the time and for sharing all this stuff with us. I'm excited about the mastermind groups, and it'll be a fun year. Thanks, Kenny.
It's going to be. Yeah, awesome. Have a great one.
Well, that was great, wasn't it? I mean, a lot of the stuff Kenny talked about there applies to every role, whether you're NextGen Pastor or not. It was kind of like a breakout at a conference or like a class of sorts of how to start well and pay attention to those things. Here are some action items that I had coming out of there that I think you could take. One is to take the 5 things he talked about and evaluate where you are in those. Maybe you've been there for 10 years, but you could probably improve in one of those areas. Where are you not doing well? And then the next step would be create a simple 3-step or something action plan to get better this month. Not this year or, over the long haul. What's one thing you can do each week for the next 3 weeks to maybe improve there? Or the other thing to think about would be, are you still operating like you're new to the role? And in reality, what you need to do is expand and use the influence that you have, having been there now for a while, and lead through other people more. Because that's part of it. Is early on, it's highly relational. You're getting to know everyone, and that is great. At the end of the day, we're in the people business, as my pastor says. But if you're going to grow it, you can't know everyone. You can't be close with everyone in the ministry. You've got to lead through other people. So maybe that's where you are. And maybe your action plan is 3 ways you're going to expand your influence and lead through other people more. Well, you can get all the notes, including the 5 things, in the show notes at nickblevins.com/episode 67. While you're there, if you're interested in joining one of the mastermind groups, click that link. You can fill out the application, pick the group, that would fit you the best. And we'll wrap those up here real soon. In fact, this coming weekend, we'll put those together. So, I'd encourage you to sign up this week if you can. It is open until September 15th, but that's only if there are spots available, and they are going fast. So check that out if you're interested. In the next episode, I talk with Rich Birch, and some of you may listen to his podcast, the Unseminary podcast. It's excellent. I highly recommend it. And we talk about the differences in family ministry between churches that are like under 1,000 and over 1,000. And so whether you're on one side or the other, I think it's a great interview. We talk about kind of the unique challenges of getting past 1,000. But in my experience, you could be a church of 3,000 and still be facing some of those. They can pop up in different ways. You could be a church of 300 and you're doing things now that are going to maybe stop you, prevent you from growing to even 500, right? So the growth barrier conversations are interesting. We end up talking about general church growth stuff as well. So it's a great interview. Loved having Rich on. So be sure to subscribe if you haven't already so you see when new episodes come out. And I'll see you next week in the Family Ministry Podcast.
Thanks for listening to the Nick Blevins Family Ministry Podcast. We hope this helps you maximize your church's potential. We would love to hear stories of how you apply what you've learned. You can do that by leaving a comment on iTunes or in the show notes at nickblevins.com.